The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
Welcome from the General Assembly and the City of Richmond. I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports and the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association. We are truly honored this morning to have Speaker of the House Bill Howell with us. Welcome, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Woody. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Well, I think people might be interested in hearing a little bit about your personal background and history. I understand that you learned the value of a vote when you ran for college president.
Yeah, I did.
Tell us what happened.
Well, I lost by 3 votes, and I bet I had some fraternity brothers that just didn't vote, or maybe voted the other way. I don't know, but yeah, that does give you a perspective of how important every vote is, and never to take things for granted, and always to. And that's a message I give to a lot of my members in my caucus, that you don't take anything for granted, and you work very hard right up till the end.
Now, you have major responsibilities as the Speaker of the House, but of course you represent a very vibrant district as well, Stafford and City of Fredericksburg.
Yes,
Tell us about how things are going there economically.
Well, they're picking up. Stafford County especially has a pretty low unemployment rate today because of a lot of the government and government-related activity. A lot of my constituents that don't work in Stafford commute north each day to Northern Virginia or Washington, D.C. There's a growing number of government-related enterprises growing in North Stafford County around Quantico Marine Base. That's a very vibrant activity that's going on there now. The City of Fredericksburg has a little more unemployment, but basically it's the same concept. Now, we're all very concerned about what the sequestration might do to employment, not just in Northern Virginia, but in Hampton Roads and all across the Commonwealth. And that's a very significant and serious concern.
Yeah, I just noticed the Secretary of Defense in a speech yesterday indicated that one of the carriers that would ordinarily be leaving one of our ports to go to the Asian region will not be going there as a result of what may happen March 1st.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big question mark that's got a lot of us concerned.
Back to your background in history, I understand that your parents were New Deal Democrats.
Yeah. I grew up in Alexandria, moved to Fairfax when I was in high school, and Dad worked for the International Bank, and they both, my mother was from England. And
from England?
She came over when she was about probably 21 or 22, something like that. And but Dad grew up during the Depression and was a New Deal Democrat, and kind of grew up. We talked a lot of public policy, politics around the dining room table, and you know, you're kind of swayed by what your parents think, and I'm sure I grew up supporting a lot of those ideas. When I was in college, I decided I wanted to do some more investigation and kind of read and find out more about different government positions, public policy positions. And I read a lot one summer. Would read books like I read Barry Goldwater's book Conscience of a Conservative. Yeah, yes. And I read a book by Hubert Humphrey. I don't think it was called The Happy Warrior, but something like that.
Right.
And I gradually decided that I was more of a free market person and more of a, probably more conservative. And you know, that's something I think a lot of people get as they get older. Winston Churchill said, if you're not a liberal when you're young, you don't have a heart, and if you're not conservative when you're older, you don't have a brain. And he had a way of cutting to the core, didn't he?
He certainly did. But you've been here since 1987, I believe.
I was elected in 87, 88 was my first year.
And you've been Speaker since, what, 2003 now?
Yes, 2000. This is my 11th session as Speaker.
Great. And what are your duties and responsibilities as Speaker of the House?
Well, the Speaker presides over the House. My job is to recognize people when they want to speak, to introduce or debate on a bill. I think part of my job is to try and move the train along, make sure that we don't get bogged down from time to time. Also, and this has not ever been a real problem, to ensure that we have civility, that people are respectful. You know, we talk about the Virginia way, and we pride ourselves on being respectful and our civility. It's not always there, but we work on that. Some of the other duties of Speaker would include, one of the more significant ones is I appoint the members and the chairman of all standing committees.
Okay.
I also appoint or designate which committee gets which bill, and that can have an impact on how it's going to do, which committee it gets assigned to, and I try and be relatively consistent on that. When the Senate and House bills don't agree, and it has to go to conference, I appoint the members of the House conference side of the conference committee. That's particularly significant with the budget conferees because, as you know, that's probably the conference committee that gets the most attention when the 5 or 6 House members and 5 and 6 Senate members get together to iron out the budget. So it's a full-time job. One of the hardest things I have to do as Speaker is appoint the pages.
Okay.
You know, I'll have 140, 150 really bright, intelligent, active young men and women that apply to be pages, and I can only take 38 or 40 of them, and it's difficult.
It must be.
Yeah.
Tell us, what's the most significant change you have seen in politics since you've been here, number one, and number two, how difficult is it in the complexity of the environment we have these days to maintain the bedrock principle of a citizen legislator?
Oh, those are some great questions, Woody. We could spend the rest of the time talking about that. I think probably the most significant change that I've seen in the 26 years I've been here is the impact of technology on what we do. When I first came down here, we had fax machines, but we didn't have internet to speak of, and the constituent input wasn't as vibrant as it is today, and that's good that we're much more involved now. The blogs that are out there, the reports that are out there, the 24-hour news that's out there that people are aware of really increases citizen participation, and that's healthy. Sometimes it's uncomfortable, but it's healthy. And we'll probably get in my office a couple hundred emails a day from constituents and from people all around the Commonwealth, and we read each one, we answer those that we can, and that gives us a good perspective of what the public's feeling about certain issues. And that kind of relates to the second part of your question about how hard is it to continue to run a legislature that's part-time. And the problems are, we are part-time. We only meet for 60 days in the long session and 45 or 46 days in the short sessions. But there's a lot of other activity. In the House, we run for re-election every 2 years, and you're kind of on a perpetual re-election campaign, which means when you're back home, you're going to citizen meetings, town hall meetings, you're going to Boy Scout award dinners and things like that, and that's all important. The thing that I really treasure about the part-time legislature is that we are back home in our communities 10 months out of the year. And I like to tell people that I stop at a Wawa gas station on the way to work most every morning to get a cup of coffee. And invariably, somebody will come up to me and say, why don't you do this, or why did you do that, or talk about politics, and that's as it should be. I have an office in southern Stafford County, a place called Falmouth, and most every day somebody will come in the office with a question or a comment or a complaint. And that's the benefit of a part-time legislature. We're all back home in the communities 10 months out of the year. The disadvantage is we all have to earn a living. Sure. And it's tough for a lot of people to be able to give up their job for 2 months, if you will. Yeah, sure, you can. You know, I practice law, and I'll try and do some legal work in my office back home Friday afternoons and Saturday, but you can't really keep up like you should. Right. And for people that work for corporations or larger businesses, it's increasingly difficult to get them to be able to participate. And I think I tell the bankers every year when I meet with them, because I used to work for a bank before I got involved in the legislature, and the bank after a couple of years it was clear they weren't happy that I was gone for a couple of months a year, and I can see their point. They got a bottom line to worry about. But I do think it's important for larger businesses, to the extent that they can do it, that they realize the benefit of a citizens legislature, and they realize the benefit of having one of their employees participating in that process.
Transparency has increased by leaps and bounds. Technology has. You mentioned the budget and conferees. I hear tell that years and years ago, budget conferees used to disappear from the city, go someplace else, work out a deal, come back, and then announce it.
Well, that was before my time, but there wasn't a lot of transparency when I first got here. They wouldn't leave the city, but they'd work in literally smoke-filled rooms and cut the deals. And now everything is much more open to the public, and that's really healthy. That's really good.
And of course, you recently had to make a very difficult decision relating to the germaneness of a bill that was sent over from the state Senate regarding redistricting.
Right.
Talk to us about how you came to your decision and what your analysis consisted of.
Well, and that's one of the things I didn't mention when you asked about the duties of Speaker. One of my duties is to make parliament rulings on points of order or parliamentary inquiries. And we have a rule in the House. They really don't have it, I don't think, in the Senate rules, that deals with something called germaneness. And the topic of germaneness deals with, are the two topics, the underlying bill and the amendment to it, are they related? Are they pertinent to the same thing? And if they're not, then our rules say that it can't be considered. And the reason is we don't want to be like Washington, where they tag all sorts of different amendments on a bill, and it catches you unaware. You really haven't thought about this or that proposition. So we have, and germaneness is really in the eye of the beholder, the person. You may think something's germane and I don't, and that's just a subjective difference. But what I've tried to do in my 11 years as Speaker, and what my predecessor, Vance Wilkins, initiated, was a fairly tight rule of germaneness. If someone was going to put an amendment on a bill, it had to really encompass the same thing. And the Senate amendment that was put on a House bill, the House bill dealt with technical redistricting changes after our main redistricting bill in 2011 and 2012. We introduced a bill to put together some divided precincts. You might have a precinct where if you lived in one part of it, you voted for one person. If you lived in the other part, you voted for another person. And that's confusing and to the citizenry. And so every year after the redistricting bill passes, we canvass the registrars around the Commonwealth and ask if they can suggest some technical changes that might close some of these divided precincts. So we got the bill back that made the technical changes, sent it over to the Senate. They held it for a year, and then laid a much broader amendment on it that really redid the whole Senate redistricting map. The politics of it were pretty loud, but that didn't enter into my decision. Some people were saying, well, it's constitutional what they did. Well, that doesn't enter into my decision. That's for the courts. My decision was basically, if under the current rules of the House, or was that Senate amendment germane to the original bill, the underlying bill. And I did a lot of research on it. I checked previous rulings that I'd made on germaneness over the past 11 years. I talked with people that really know the rules of order. I prayed about it a lot, and came up with the decision that the Senate amendments were not germane to the underlying bill, and so they were out of order, and we could not deal with them.
But it's part of the job.
Yes, it is. Yeah, that's why they pay me the extra money.
Well, by the way, congratulations on getting the transportation initiative through the House of Delegates, and hopefully it'll be resolved over in the Senate side sooner rather than later.
I'm hopeful. Yeah, the Senate, as you know, killed all their transportation initiatives, so the House bill, which I'm the chief patron of, is the only one left. And I'm hopeful, and I've had some assurances from leadership in the Senate that they will consider our bill. I'm sure they will put some of their ideas, some of their amendments on it, and probably where it will end up will be in one of those conference committees we were talking about earlier. And hopefully, again, they'll come up with something that is reasonable. The conferees will be able to agree on something that both a majority of the members of the House and a majority of the members of the Senate can approve.
As it stands now, do the fees that were associated with raising additional revenue still stand? For example, the $15 additional fee for registering a vehicle and the alternative fuel vehicle.
On the House bill, that again is the only one left, we still have the $15 increase for registration. The additional fee for alternative fuel vehicles or hybrid vehicles has been removed, so that's not in the bill now.
Now, what about the pushback apparently from those who operate farm equipment relating to the retention of the diesel fuel tax?
Right. We put a provision in the bill. That's a great question because, as you know, in the governor's bill, we eliminate the gasoline tax, the 17.5 cents a gallon, but we keep the diesel tax. And the reason we keep the diesel tax is about 70% of it is used by people traveling through the Commonwealth, by non-residents. And of course, the big trucks that use it are the ones that do most of the wear and tear on the highway. So we left that in place. Unfortunately, that picks up people that have vehicles that they drive, cars that are diesel operated. And so there's a provision in the bill that's not unlike what we already do for farm vehicles. The farm vehicles, they keep their receipts and they send them in and they get a rebate. And we're going to probably do the same thing with vehicles used for personal.
And there seems to be more optimism about the potential for legislation pending in Congress regarding the taxing of retail online sales. We have the majority leader from Virginia, who you know very well. We have the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Bob Goodlatte. We have two former governors who are now U.S. senators that you've worked closely with. So there's some optimism there, even though that legislation has languished for some time.
Well, there's optimism. Somebody on the floor yesterday made the comment that Washington's not going to act on this anytime soon, and they may not for a year or two or three, but when they do, it's going to be significant revenue coming in to Virginia, and I think what our bill will do will make sure that that new money, which we haven't received in the past, will be dedicated to transportation. You know, Woody, it's not a new tax. We have in Virginia, we call it the sales and use tax. And
so we're supposed to declare that on our state income tax returns.
And you know, very few people do. Very few people probably know about it. These are items that you buy over the internet from somebody that doesn't have a presence in Virginia, and so they don't collect sales tax. Or you can buy them over the phone from different places. When I buy something from LL Bean, I pay a sales tax on it because they have a presence in Virginia. But if I buy something from Overstock.com, I don't pay a sales tax. Now, I do pay a use tax because I've railed so long about this. I'm afraid somebody's going to say, well, let's see your tax returns, Howell, and see what you do. And so every year when I get my tax returns done, I tell my accountant that I just estimate that I spent X dollars on internet purchases that weren't taxed, and I pay that use tax. I think, but most people don't do that, and most people don't know about it. And what the federal law would do would be to pick up that tax and distribute it to the states.
So why is this transportation funding initiative so important to the continued economic viability of the Commonwealth?
Well, we have serious problems, as most everybody in Northern Virginia or Hampton Roads or in between could tell you. It's not a problem in all parts of the state. It's not of the magnitude that it is in Northern Virginia. It makes it more difficult to attract new business to come to those parts of the Commonwealth if they know they're going to have transportation problems, getting their workers to and from work, getting their products out to the rest of the community. We have an aging system. We haven't really done much with funding to the transportation infrastructure since 1986 or 87. We have had some significant mega project bills. We've borrowed some money over the past couple of years where we've been able to at very low interest rates and where the competition for the businesses is driven down the cost. And we've really been able to sort of leverage $4 or $5 billion in money into probably $8 or $9 billion worth of projects. But that doesn't cover the ordinary maintenance or the new construction, and that money is dwindling. And it's dwindling because the gasoline tax is becoming less and less dependable.
It was never indexed to inflation.
It is not indexed to inflation, but even if it were indexed to inflation, people are just buying less and less gasoline because they're buying alternative fuel vehicles or hybrids CAFE standards that dictate the fuel
corporate
efficiency.
average fuel economy, I believe.
Yeah, yeah.
55 gallons
in 2022 or something.
55 miles to the gallon.
55 miles a gallon.
Right.
And so we have to find something that's more dependable than the gasoline tax, and that's part of the governor's proposals as well.
So a little bit going on in education this session as well. Very successfully received, and apparently most of the elements of the governor's proposals have passed.
Yeah, it's real reform in K-12 education, in kindergarten through high school. It's looking at everything from how our relationships, our contractual relationship with our teachers is done, to core content, to allowing it more accessible for charter schools to be created, and it all seems to be moving along. It's a very important part of what is the state's core responsibility, what we're supposed to be doing.
Teach for America is part of that.
Yeah, that's a neat project. Yeah, that's very good. I'm kind of surprised we haven't done that already, but it encourages young people to come into the teaching profession, and I think that's a key. Obviously, the teachers are such a key to the success of our education system, and this will encourage more people to look at that as a very good profession.
And bringing a little bit more transparency and ease into way parents can determine how well their schools are doing.
Right.
Grades A through F for schools.
Yeah, I think that's helpful.
And, of course, teacher raises, which haven't occurred since, what, 2007, I believe?
Well, from a state level,
right.
A lot of local governments have continued to fund it, but the state has an interest in doing that as well, and the governor has proposed a raise for not only teachers but support staff. And
of course, that's hand in hand with what you mentioned before, the reforming of the teacher contracts.
Yes, it's all part together.
Right, exactly. And you did mention charter schools. Apparently, there's a move by way of a constitutional amendment to give jurisdiction of charter schools in terms of application, at least, to the State Board of Education.
We've had the authority for charter schools for some years in Virginia, probably 15 years. But because the Virginia Constitution says all matters of education are done at the local level, the charter legislation requires that any application for a charter school has to go through the local school board, and they've been reluctant to do that. I'm not sure what the thinking is, whether they think it's going to take money out of their system for a separate charter school, or they're concerned about the competition. I'm not sure what the reason are, but for whatever reason, we only have 4 charter schools in Virginia that they get turned down routinely. I'll give you a personal example. My son lives in Norfolk, and he was very involved with a school called the Park Place School, which is a private school. And what the Park Place School has done is it takes children that are 3 grade levels or more behind in their studies and their work. These are kids that they're primarily, it's an inner city school, and these are kids that just don't have a lot of the advantages that other kids have. And it takes them out of the public system and puts them in this private school, and after a year and a half, brings them back up to grade level, sends them back to the public schools. It's a wonderful concept. They've tried several times to get a charter from the city of Norfolk and have been turned down. And now they're out of business because they can't continue to fund the school. I think that's tragic. You've got these kids, there's hundreds of kids in the Norfolk system now that were rescued, if you will, by this opportunity at Park Place School and are flourishing in the public system. But now, unless they can get some additional funding or get a charter, that advantage is gone for other kids. Right.
In terms of job creation, I know you're particularly proud of the group of freshmen who came in last year. We've created a new caucus, the Business Development Caucus. We
have had a good group of young first-year people that came in last year that were different business people of different types. We had one of them's a farmer, and one of them runs a home health care business, and one of them is an engineering kind of manufacturer, and the other one works with franchises and imports and exports. And they created this, I call it the Small Business Caucus, but it's the Business Development Caucus. And there's about 20 members in it, and they've come up with a whole list of ideas that for legislation. They've put about 15 pieces of legislation in that's going to make it easier to create a small business and easier to continue to run a small business.
Right.
The small business is really the backbone of our economy, not only in Virginia but in this country. And this is where the jobs are being created now, not in the larger companies, but in the small businesses that might have 10, 20, 200 people, and they're the ones that are hiring and growing and creating new opportunities.
Medicaid expansion as a result of the upholding of the Affordable Care Act. The Supreme Court gave states a lot more discretion in terms of expanding Medicaid, and I know there's still talks going on between the Commonwealth and the federal government, but apparently it could prove to be a very expensive outcome for the state if the federal government does not live up to its commitment.
Well, it's incredibly expensive. The numbers of the new people that would be able to enroll in Medicaid are anywhere from 250,000 to 400,000 citizens of Virginia that would be eligible for Medicaid. Medicaid's a broken system. We're spending it's become the second largest part of our budget. We spend over 22% of our general fund budget on Medicaid. 25, 30 years ago, it was probably 5% of our budget.
5 to 22%.
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. And a lot of us are really reluctant to expand Medicaid with, say, 300,000 more people on the promise that the federal government is going to pay for it all for 3 years and then 90% of it for the rest of the time. The federal government cannot afford to do that. This is trillions of dollars if every state participated in it that they don't have. They're over $16 trillion in debt now. They run a budget deficit of over $1 trillion a year, and they can't continue to do that. And the efforts are laudable. You want everybody to have health care insurance, but I don't think it's right to pour more money into a broken system. So we think this is an opportunity to work with the federal government on relaxing some of these standards, giving the states more control over their Medicaid funding. It's a 50-50 split in Virginia. We pay 50%, they pay 50%, except for this new expanded benefit. And we need more of a voice in it. There's a lot of opportunities to cut costs and save money, and if that will work out, I'm all for it. But I'm very skeptical of first of all, the federal government really loosening up their restrictions. That's very unlike what they've done over the past 20 or 30 years. But secondly, I don't see how they can afford to continue to pay. They just don't have the money.
Well, we'll end it there, and good luck during the remainder of the session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your public service.
Thank you, Woody.
Really
I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks
Great.
a lot.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.
Mm-hmm.